All right, so are you ready to dive into some, shall we say, unconventional wisdom?
Always up for a challenge, especially when it comes to shaking up the status quo.
Well, buckle up because we're about to explore the world of Osho and his rather provocative views on marriage and family.
Oh boy, Osho. Talk about someone who wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, provocative might be an understatement. You guys sent in some seriously thought-provoking excerpts from his talks, and let me tell you, he does not hold back.
No, he definitely did not. He really challenged people to rethink, well, pretty much everything, but especially their ideas about love and relationships.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to unpack his arguments against traditional marriage, which he really goes off on, explore his radical vision of a commune-based society, and hopefully extract some nuggets of wisdom, or at the very least, some serious food for thought.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Well, he comes right out of the gate declaring he's against marriage.
Which, knowing Osho, is not entirely surprising.
Right. He even talks about how he resisted marriage his whole life, even though it caused some friction with his family.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It really makes you wonder, why take such a strong stance against something so, well, so universally accepted?
Especially considering the cultural context, right? I mean, Osho grew up in India in the mid-20th century, where family expectations, especially around marriage, carried a lot of weight. So it's not just a personal preference, it's a direct challenge to societal norms.
It's like he's rejecting the default setting for life,
Mm.
deleting the preloaded life script.
Exactly. And it's this rebellious spirit that sets the stage for his rather unconventional views on, well, just about everything.
So to understand why Osho was so against marriage, we need to understand his core values. He was all about individual freedom, which he saw as the ultimate human value, right?
Absolutely. And he believed that marriage, with all its rules and expectations, directly contradicted that freedom. He saw it as a trap.
Trap.
Yeah, he argued that it traps people in potentially loveless, inauthentic relationships, leading to all sorts of psychological hang-ups.
He didn't just dance around the issue. He straight up called marriage ugly.
Did it? He was not one for mincing words.
No, he was not. He said it forces people into situations where they're living a lie, just going through the motions.
And that all this pretending, all this inauthenticity could make people neurotic.
Neurotic. That's a pretty strong word. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he was getting at the emotional and psychological toll that staying in an unfulfilling relationship can take on a person.
It's like he's saying, wake up. Why are you choosing to live like this?
Right. Like snap out of it.
Exactly. But of course, it's never that simple in the real world, is it?
No, it's definitely not. And that's what makes Osho's views so thought-provoking, They make you question everything, but they don't always offer easy answers.
Okay, so if marriage is off the table, what does Osho propose as an alternative?
Get ready for this one.
Yeah.
He envisions a world without traditional marriage altogether.
Okay, I'm listening.
Instead, he proposes a radical shift toward communal living and child rearing.
You mean like a commune where everyone shares everything? Responsibilities, resources, even children?
That's exactly what he means. He believed that children suffer from what he called a kind of poverty when they're raised within the confines of a traditional family structure.
It's an interesting way to put it, a kind of poverty. What do you think he meant by that?
He's suggesting that children raised in traditional families are deprived of a more diverse upbringing.
He believed that exposure to a wider range of perspectives, values, experiences, all of that within a commune, would lead to, and I'm quoting him here, immense enrichment for children.
And that this immense enrichment would ultimately benefit society as a whole.
Wow. Okay. It's like he's suggesting we could create a whole generation of more open-minded, well-rounded individuals if we just rethink the traditional family model.
Right. He's talking about a complete restructuring of how we think about family and child rearing. It's not about tweaking the system. He wants to hit the reset button.
This is where things start to feel really radical, right? I mean, it's one thing to critique marriage, but to propose abolishing the family structure as we know it, that's a whole other level.
I mean, where do you even begin to unpack that?
I know. I'm sure some of you listening are thinking, hold on a minute, how would this even work in practice?
Right. Like logistically speaking.
Exactly. And honestly, that's a valid question, and there are so many more where that came from.
Oh, I'm sure. For example, How would communal child rearing actually play out in a community? What happens to the idea of individual parental rights? And let's be honest, how do you address those very real concerns about the potential for abuse or neglect?
Right. Which, let's be honest, can happen in any setting, whether it's a traditional family or a commune. These are serious questions that need to be addressed.
They really do. It's like we've moved from a theoretical discussion to a whole bunch of logistical and ethical
And
questions.
we've only just scratched the surface.
Right. What's interesting is that Osho's ideas often spark more questions than answers.
He was more about shaking things up than handing us a step-by-step guide to a utopian society, I guess.
100%. He wanted to make us think, to question our assumptions.
Which, when you think about it, isn't a bad thing.
Not at all. Sometimes we need a little shakeup to get us out of our comfort zones. And Osho was certainly good at that.
He was the master. In fact, one of his most attention-grabbing comparisons relates to traditional marriage in a, shall we say, unconventional way.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Do tell.
Well, to really hammer home his point about societal hypocrisy, he draws a parallel between traditional marriage and the biblical story of Mary's impregnation by the Holy Spirit.
Whoa, that is quite the comparison.
It is. It's definitely not what I was expecting. I'll be honest, when you said unconventional comparison, that was not what I had in mind.
Yeah, he doesn't exactly shy away from provocative imagery, does he?
Not at all. But there's always a method to his, shall we say, madness. So, what do you think he's getting at with this whole Mary and the Holy Spirit comparison?
Well, it's classic Osho in a way, right? Using a really unexpected, kind of jarring analogy to make you pay attention. He wants to shake us out of our comfort zones, make us question those deeply ingrained beliefs we often take for granted.
And in this case, it's those beliefs around marriage and relationships.
Exactly. He's highlighting the hypocrisy, the double standards around sexuality and relationships that often get a free pass when we're talking about traditional marriage.
Because it's sanctioned by religion, by tradition, by society in general.
Right. But then other forms of conception, other types of relationships, those are often judged, condemned, even demonized.
Even though, when you really think about it, they're not all that different from the example he's using.
Precisely. It's like he's saying, hold on a minute, let's not pretend that one model is inherently more pure or sacred than another. He wants us to peel back the layers, to examine those power dynamics, those assumptions that underpin these institutions we often don't even question.
Okay, yeah, I can see how he's using this comparison as a tool to kind of expose those double standards, to make us confront those uncomfortable truths we often avoid. But it's a risky strategy, right? This kind of in-your-face approach, it could easily backfire.
Oh, absolutely. It could be alienating to some people, especially those who are deeply devout or hold very traditional views. But I think that's part of what makes Osho so fascinating.
He's walking that line between sparking insightful dialogue and potentially putting people off.
Exactly. It's like he's throwing a grenade into our preconceived notions and seeing what explodes. And sometimes, that explosion can lead to a breakthrough, to a new understanding.
Or it could just create a bigger mess.
That's true. But I think that's the risk you take when you're dealing with ideas that challenge the status quo. Not everyone's going to be ready or willing to go there.
But for those who are, it can be a wild ride.
100%.
So, regardless of how you feel about his methods, whether you find him brilliant, offensive, or just plain weird, I think there's no denying that Osho makes you think, right? He forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about love, relationships, and how we structure our lives.
He really does. And that's something I really appreciate about his perspective. He's not afraid to dive into the depths, even when it comes to love. He talks about how easy it is to get caught up in our projections, our expectations, how we try to fit our partners into these idealized molds instead of just accepting them for who they are, flaws and all.
Which is, let's be honest, something we all do to some extent.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We all have our ideas about what a perfect partner should be, how a relationship should look. But Osho believed that this kind of conditional love, this need to change or control our partners, is a recipe for disappointment.
It's like we're setting ourselves and our partners up for failure before we even begin.
Exactly. And so he challenges us to let go of those expectations, to embrace the messiness and imperfection of real love.
It's about meeting each other where we are, not where we wish the other person would be.
Exactly. It's about accepting our partners for who they truly are, not who we want them to be.
Which is a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, it takes a lot of self-awareness and maturity to really embrace that level of acceptance in a relationship.
It really does. But I think that's the kind of love Osho is encouraging us to strive for, a love that is rooted in freedom and acceptance.
And honestly, who doesn't want that?
Right.
But let's be real, love isn't always sunshine and roses, is it? Even Osho, with his perhaps somewhat romanticized view of love, acknowledged that relationships can be messy and complicated.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't shy away from the shadow side of love, the jealousy, the power struggle, the inevitable conflicts that can arise even when two people genuinely care about each other.
So, how did he suggest we navigate those choppy waters? Did he have any advice for dealing with those more challenging aspects of love? So, how do we navigate those rocky relationship roads? Did Osho have any advice for, dealing with the not so pretty parts of love?
He did. He was a big believer in something he called conscious communication.
Conscious communication. What does that look like in practice?
It's about being really honest with yourself and your partner about your needs and your feelings, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you think it might rock the boat.
That's easier said than done, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
It takes courage to be vulnerable, to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes a little.
It's like ripping off the Band-Aid. It's going to hurt, but then at least it's done.
Exactly. And sometimes that's what it takes to clear the air, to move forward in a relationship.
So it's not about avoiding conflict altogether.
No, Osho actually believed those difficult conversations, those moments of friction, they can actually be opportunities for growth, for deeper intimacy and understanding.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding the tough stuff, but more about how we approach it.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where both partners feel safe, to be honest, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. He believed that kind of radical honesty is essential if you want a relationship to really thrive.
It makes you think about how often we sweep things under the rug, right?
Right.
Or we just avoid difficult conversations altogether because it's easier than rocking the boat.
Absolutely. We're so afraid of conflict, of saying the wrong thing. But sometimes those uncomfortable conversations, as hard as they might be in the moment, they can be the key to unlocking a whole other level of intimacy and connection with your partner.
So maybe Osho is onto something here.
Maybe he is.
It's like he's encouraging us to show up authentically in our relationships, right? Communicate openly, honestly, embrace the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Absolutely. And to never stop questioning, exploring, evolving, both individually and together.
Wow, this has been quite a ride. We've gone from abolishing marriage to embracing radical honesty. Osho definitely gave us a lot to unpack, didn't he?
He really did. But even if you don't agree with everything he said, even if you just take away one or two things from this conversation, I think it's been a worthwhile dive.
I agree. He really challenges us to examine those deeply held beliefs about love, about relationships, about how we structure our lives.
He really does.
Yeah.
He was all about personal freedom, authenticity, and creating a world where love can flourish in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. If love is truly a journey of growth and discovery, as Osho suggests, then maybe the most important question we can ask ourselves is this: what does love look like for me? Not based on societal expectations, not based on what other people are doing, but based on my own unique needs and values.
And once you have even a glimmer of an answer to that question, the next step is to go out and create it.
Beautifully said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.